Get ready to dive deep into the heart of the political storm, right here on Pollitt-tics.
And welcome back. This is your host, Greg Pollitt, to the wonderful podcast of Pollitt-tics, your daily dose of unvarnished truth where we cut through the leftist propaganda like a hot knife through socialist butter. And let me tell you guys, we're living in a time of absolute mayhem. Thanks to the dereliction of duty by Democrat governors and mayors across this country, we've seen this week a decisive move from our Commander-in-Chief, President Trump, to finally address the chaos in what I can only call the war zones that are our liberal-run cities. But let's be clear about one thing. The President's use of the National Guard to protect federal law and order is not new. It has a long and vital tradition in American history. It is often precisely when state and local officials refuse to do their job. So we take a look at the headlines from this past weekend. First in Chicago, President Trump authorized the deployment of 300 National Guard troops to protect federal officers and assets, including those who bravely are conducting crucial immigration enforcement. And what was the response of the Democrat governor, J.B. Pritzker? He called it a manufactured performance and an ultimatum. That's unbelievable, an ultimatum. The only ultimatum here is the one handed down by lawless mobs to our federal agents: submit or be assaulted. And Pritzker is siding with the mob, refusing to protect his constituents, his citizens of his state, by enforcing federal law, removing illegal immigrants. And now we have reports that are confirmed internal dispatches that the Chicago Police Department's own chief of patrol ordered officers not to respond to calls for help from federal agents who are being rammed and surrounded by an armed crowd. Now let that sink in. Law enforcement ordering law enforcement not to enforce the law. In America, local law enforcement, under the thumb of a radical leftist mayor and governor, was ordered to stand down and leave federal officers, our Border Patrol agents, to fend for themselves. One of these perpetrators was armed, and a federal agent was forced to fire a defensive shot. We saw videos of a parked law enforcement vehicle, lights flashing, be rammed from behind, pushed up through traffic. Agents jumped out of their vehicles, drew their weapons. Insanity. That, my friends, is not just a move that anybody would do. That's a typical thing from cartels. That's typical from insurgents, guerrilla warfare, from Iraq. We've seen stuff like this all over the country, all over the world, and it's starting to get worse here in the United States. This is what many people in the powers of position, aka the George Soroses, the Hillary Clintons, the Barack Obamas, the Joe Bidens, wanted to do to this country. They wanted to fundamentally destroy the United States. by bringing in people from third world nations who are unhinged, who are unsafe, and bring in that mindset of guerrilla warfare and terrorism. Sitting governor and mayor would rather stand aside, letting a federal officer get rammed by a vehicle that led to the defensive shooting of a citizen, in this case, who had been broadcasting locations of ICE agents, who had also been doxing them, than to accept help to secure his city. Now, of course, the left want to cry and complain and call it an escalation, but the truth is we are restoring order where the local leaders have utterly failed. Think of it like this. Anybody that's a parent out there, if you let your child take a cookie, you don't say anything, they come back and take a second cookie, or a third, or a 20th cookie. Without the parent setting the ground rules and stating at the very beginning, you can't have a cookie unless you ask for it, and then catching them when they took it by breaking the rules, enforcing the rules by taking the cookie away and grounding them, or not letting them have any cookies. It's just a really very basic psychological principle of how the law works. When you let someone break a small law, they will come back and do it again. Eventually, that will escalate into bigger and worse offenses. So, as a parent, if you don't correct your child and to do things the right way, they become more unruly. They become less likely to follow rules, to follow the structure, to disobey in school, to disobey at home, to be more and more and more involved in trouble. Structure is how society functions. From a child growing up to laws enacted in this nation. So when you have the parents of this story, the governors, the mayors of sanctuary cities, not enforcing the laws on the books, not enforcing that structure, you invite worse offenses. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing the escalation of criminal behavior. That part, the Democrats and I agree on it being an escalation. Instead of protecting their own citizens, they've created an active safe haven for criminal agitators. And when police are ordered to retreat, the anarchists advance. It's just that simple. That's not governance. It's capitulation. And the cost of safety of every single federal employee in that city, not just the men and women who are out there trying to secure our nation again, our cities, where this unlawfulness is ongoing, but for the American people, for the citizens of these cities, of these states. By having to go in with federal officers, they've created this atmosphere where it's a tinderbox waiting to explode. Everybody's safety is at risk. But it's something that has to be done by the federal government to get rid of these criminals. When you have in Chicago the excessive amounts of shootings every week and murders every weekend. That is unacceptable. And the offering of resources to these cities to where they could easily say thank you. Because let's be honest, they have overstressed largely their local law enforcement. And then in recent elections, you have the Soros backed, American taxpayer funded, Soros backed attorneys, prosecutors, and attorney generals moving into place that have not prosecuted crime, that have let the big offenders go to create more little offenders. It's just a cycle that we have to stop. Or our society as we know it will cease to exist. Say goodbye to Chicago and say hello to Mogadishu. That's what will happen if we do not stop this. Of course, the liberal media always acts in feign and horror that a president would use federal authority to restore order in a monumental act of historical ignorance. But what's most likely is it's all intentional deception. They want you to believe that in some unique authoritarian power grab, the president haven't done this before. And the presidents that have is to force a reluctant state to comply with federal law as a dictatorship. But let's look at the facts. What they're doing is allowing the disintegration of law. During the civil rights era, the governor of Arkansas used the Arkansas National Guard to prevent black students from entering a central high school in 1957. What did President Dwight Eisenhower do? He federalized the entire Arkansas National Guard, sent in the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army to ensure those students were protected and federal laws were enforced. The state governor was actively defying the Supreme Court. President Eisenhower brought the hammer down. Then you had President John F. Kennedy in 1962 when he was forced to send the federalized National Guard and U.S. Army troops to escort James Meredith, a black student, onto the campus of the University of Mississippi. Led to riots and bloodshed, and again in 1963 when Alabama Governor George Wallace literally stood in the door of the University of Alabama to block 2 black students from enrolling. Kennedy didn't hesitate. He federalized the National Guard to remove Wallace and force the desegregation. Not to mention quelling massive riots in the 60s, where we had cities burning. Following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, riots broke out in over 100 cities. President Lyndon B. Johnson had to send in federal troops and federalize the National Guard to quell the unrest and the looting in major cities like Washington, D.C. This was a direct emergency response to restore basic public order. During the Rodney King riots in California in 1992, President George H.W. Bush had to invoke the Insurrection Act, where he sent thousands of federal troops and federalized the National Guard in to help secure Los Angeles. after their local response was overwhelmed and ineffective trying to keep the peace in order. So when a president acts to protect federal personnel, federal property, in a Democrat-run city where the local leaders are unwilling, let's be honest, they're unwilling, they're not unable to act, as with the deployment in Chicago or what's going to happen in Portland or is happening. President Trump is standing on the firm, a historical bedrock of presidential authority. Whether it's enforcing civil rights or quelling a riot, the President of the United States has a duty to ensure the laws of the U.S. are faithfully executed. The left calls this an authoritarian power grab. We call it upholding the oath of office. Then you had Portland judge try to prevent President Trump from sending troops into Portland. The judicial anarchy that is ongoing is insane. In Portland, Oregon is definitely another liberal hellscape that goes back several years. Trump administration attempted to federalize and deploy 200 Oregon National Guard members to protect the federal property like ICE facility that is under near constant assault. And this judge, a Trump appointee, had the audacity to temporarily block the deployment, ruled that the protests there didn't meet the legal threshold for a rebellion or insurrection. The governor, Tina Kotek, says there is no insurrection, that the deployment would inflame the protests. Have these people looked at the videos that are coming out of Portland that have been going on for the better part of a decade? Inflame them? What is she afraid of? Are the peaceful rioters going to be slightly more on fire? The administration's lawyers have presented evidence of threats, of property damage, and even a guillotine that was brought to the ICE facility. A guillotine. I guess in Portland, that's just a quaint garden decoration. They have them in abundance. You can find them on the end caps at Walmart. Come on in to Five Below. Guillotines $5 or less. Get your guillotines. Like a guillotine. Is this the French Revolution? But yet these Democrat officials and their liberal judges are trying to hide behind the Posse Comitatus Act, which is a 150-year-old law that restricts the military's role in domestic law enforcement. They wave this law around like a holy relic, but let's be clear. The president is federalizing the National Guard under Title 10 authority. That's specifically to protect federal property and personnel who are under sustained attack, which is what he did in California earlier this year, what he did in Washington, D.C., what he's doing in Memphis, in Chicago. The law allows for the military to be used when a domestic rebellion makes it impractical to enforce those laws. And when you have federal law officers being assaulted, facilities set on fire, local police told to stand down, what the hell is an insurrection to these judges? Do the courthouses have to be the one on fire before they act? The bottom line is the president's actions are measured response to protect U.S. property. The previous ruling in the Los Angeles case where the judge did claim a violation of the Policy Comitatus Act is being appealed, and frankly, it's political overreach from the bench. The President of the United States has a duty to ensure the laws of the U.S. are faithfully executed. The National Guard, when federalized, is our last line of defense against the domestic enemy of anarchy. This Portland judge is essentially signing a warrant allowing these left-wing thugs to continue their assaults unmolested. This is how we lead into a civil war. The left wants you to believe that crime is down because of their policies. They want to bury the truth. But the fact is, we've seen President Trump use and influx federal officers and National Guard troops where necessary. Crime has went down because of President Trump's actions. Giving the authority to the men and women to go in, to clean the streets, get the criminals off the streets, and make the community safer. Chicago's mayor is borderline retarded, citing a 33% reduction in homicides and a 38% drops in shootings this year, while Portland's mayor is saying they had a 51% drop in homicides. When you see the news and you see the reports coming out of these cities of gang violence, multiple shootings daily, weekly, multiple people being shot, multiple mass shootings happening with gang violence and others in these cities, do you feel safer? Does it feel like Chicago's 33% safer? I mean, come on, these numbers are a complete joke. They're comparing the stats to the absolute record-breaking Democrat policy-induced crime spikes of 2020, 2021, and 2022. That's like bragging that you're drinking only 2 gallons of vodka a day when you were drinking 3. Yeah, technically it may be down, but you're still an alcoholic mess. They're totally ignoring the decay of civil order. They ignore the open drug use, the massive property crime, the attacks on federal officers, the rampant shoplifting that is destroying local businesses, hurting the economies, driving people out of business. Through the Department of Homeland Security, the overall climate of lawlessness is what matters, and the federal government, through the Department of Homeland Security, has explicitly stated that they are moving to protect officers and property from ongoing violent riots and lawlessness in Chicago and Portland. They are responding to a very specific, undeniable threat that local leaders are either incapable or unwilling to address. And given their viewpoints and the way they've addressed their own policy, it's not incapable, they're unwilling, without a doubt. The deployment in both of these cities is directly tied to protecting federal personnel and facilities, a clear indication that the authority is being directly challenged and attacked in these liberal strongholds. The state-level crime numbers Democrats tout don't account for the constant targeting of federal officers and facilities, a problem entirely created by the failure of local governments to maintain basic public safety. So when President Trump says Portland's burning to the ground, he's speaking on the breakdown of civil order that liberal policy creates. It's insane. stop enforcing laws, they create more criminals, which creates more of a stress on local law enforcement to where it becomes an escalating snowball of hell. The officers can never be allowed to do their job in the first place to get criminals off the street. And then when they do, these prosecutors turn right around and attorney generals and let them go. Cashless bail. I was trying to come up with a joke about this whole situation, but honestly, it's just gotten so ridiculous, the news just writes itself. I mean, they brought a guillotine to a protest outside the ICE facility. A working model, I assume. I guess the Portland Antifa crowd saw Hamilton and thought, you know what this needs? More French Revolution cosplay. That's what we need. I envisioned the conversation they must have had when they were making it. All right, we need some wood. We need some rope. A blade. What's the messaging, guys? Is this for community engagement? How many likes can I get on Blue Sky? Brilliant. Let's ask the governor. What is she going to say? She's going to say it's not an insurrection. It's just Arts and Crafts Day. But do you know what the funniest part is? Governor Pritzker. This guy is a billionaire. How in the hell is he a billionaire? Besides that, he's living in his gilded cage, surrounded by private security, yet he's calling the deployment of a few hundred National Guard troops outrageous and un-American. Said he got an ultimatum in a text message from the federal government that basically said, hey, your city's in chaos. Do you want to fix it? If not, we will. So what do you think the real ultimatum to President Trump was? If you send troops, I'll be forced to buy a third vacation home in a state with lower taxes. The horror. Maybe a couple extra jelly donuts. Honestly, Pritzker is only fighting for his right to continue to fail. He's trying to posture himself as one of the leaders to maybe even become a candidate to run for president in the next election. Right now, he can't even run his way to the bathroom without security, but can't have that in your city. The city that's sprawling into madness in Chicago. But he keeps virtue signaling to you and to the other Democrat governors that he was the most anti-Trump, because let's look back at the last 3 elections. Every election cycle, it's been I'm the opposite of Trump. But yet they can't tell you a policy. They can't fight for a policy. When you question them on what their policy is and where they stand, it becomes an immediate, you're a Nazi. Every time. You're an authoritarian. So to Pritzker, I say this. Next time federal agents are being rammed by a car in your city, don't worry about the National Guard. Just tell the agents to hold on. You'll send a social worker and a diversity consultant right over. They'll talk to the car ramping perp into a restorative justice circle, and that'll fix it. Maybe make him say sorry. I mean, that's absurd, folks. The liberal media will continue to claim this is an authoritarian power grab, and that's code, folks. That's code for the president is stopping our anti-American anarchists from terrorizing the cities we control. Because it gives them an issue to run on. We're going to lower the crime. It just makes me imagine back to a Batman movie or a cartoon where the drug lord, the crime lord, wants to make his move. Well, let's look at the recent thing with Marvel. Daredevil. Kingpin comes to mind. Kingpin decides to run for mayor. He's a big crime guy. So what does he do? He has his gangs create more problems, and then he publicly gets on TV and denounces them. He calls out the people that are inept to do their job because of policies that prevent them from doing their job, and he exploits that to create more crime, more public opposition to the people not getting the job done, to where he becomes mayor. That's a Marvel comic outline. That is no different than what is happening in these cities. Democrats allow the crime to escalate so they can get on TV and say it's safe. And then when it's not, they can point to a Republican or someone else and say, well, it's all his fault, as a way to continue to defraud the people that they are trying to get to elect them. Bottom line, we got enemies that are within our borders. The Biden administration letting in over 20 million or more that we just kind of know about illegal immigrants. And I use this example all the time. If we're to believe the truth of 9/11 that is out there, where 19 terrorists hijacked aircraft, crashed them into buildings in a Pennsylvania field, the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, and killed almost 4,000 people in a single day with 19 people. So if we're to believe that is the golden truth, the golden truth here is that the Biden administration allowed 20 plus million illegals into this country. Some were grandmas and children. Some were women. Some of those were exploited into human and sex trafficking. Others, and the majority, were military-aged fighting men. Fighting-aged men. I should correct that. Military-aged, fighting-aged men. Coming from the Middle East, the Asian South Pacific, China sent many people in. Somalia, Venezuela. Throw a dart at the map in the Middle East. So if we had 19 people on 9/11, and let's just say, let's be bottom of the barrel estimates. Let's say out of 20 million people, only 1%. Only 1%. Let's be very conservative here in this estimate. Only 1% are murderers, rapists, drug dealers, human sex traffickers, terrorists, mentally unstable. That is 200,000. Now sprinkle this across the United States. Split them up into 50 cities. different areas in a coordinated attack. You cannot fathom the amount of turmoil this nation would be in. And ultimately, sadly, I think we're going to be on that path. It's inevitable. Al Qaeda, ISIS, they've all been wanting to do something even bigger than 9/11. It's been in intelligence reports. We've seen analysts on TV from the governments, not just our government, from other governments as well, talking about the dangers of these people still existing, the funding they're getting, the funding we left them in Afghanistan when Biden withdrew, leaving $80 billion, $85 billion worth of equipment, from guns to MRAPs to helicopters and tanks, you name it. So, if only 1% of those people are bad, are real bad people, with a very conservative estimate, 9/11 would look like a kindergarten class compared to what they could do. We've seen the aftermath of what one person can do in a mass shooting with a gun. When a criminal decides to break the law in doing a heinous act such as a mass shooting, whether it's gang related or whether it's some trans person that has done it in school already that we've seen recently, or church. One individual. Now imagine 200,000 individuals with IEDs running cars through crowded streets, through parades, through sporting events. The amount of chaos that could come would dive our nation into the epitome of hell. While we're trying to fight the stupid, senseless battle here in America that isn't just about crime rates or even protecting a building. It's the fundamental battle over who holds power and whether law and order are still the bedrock of this nation. It truly is about giving power back to the people of the United States. President Trump is absolutely correct to frame this as a war from within. It's been an invasion of ideology, anarchists, Antifa thugs, radical leftists, terrorists, illegal immigrants, murderers, rapists. They know that if they can successfully defy and assault federal authority in one of these Democrat-run cities, they can do it anywhere. And the Democrats continue to enable them. They're providing political, legal, and in the case of the Chicago Police Department, operational cover for these domestic terrorists. Let's be honest. These Antifa little bitches, they are a bunch of Karens who need their Starbucks from coffee that can do just enough to stir up enough crap to get people in trouble, to get people hurt. Wait till the real bad guys start. That's where we're going to be in even worse trouble than we are right now. We got the equivalent of piss ants out here crawling up our legs in Chicago with this anti-ICE shit. In Portland, these paid protesters, that's just all it is. Because as soon as they're confronted, they cower. Once their believed power is stripped from them to show them that they hold no domain over law and order, they cower like demons when Christ expelled them into the pigs. We've got to get law and order into these cities, under control, enforcing the laws, civil order, get people their lives back. There is no one in America that should be afraid to walk out their door, to go to school, to go to work, to go to the grocery store, to go to church, and have the fear of, am I going to get shot in a drive-by today? Am I going to be shot by a gangbanger? Is an illegal immigrant going to rape and kidnap and kill a woman or a child? We should not have that fear. No community should live in that fear. So yes, law and order must be reinstituted. My honest opinion, all these mayors and governors of sanctuary cities who instituted that policy change, who are actively telling law enforcement to stand down in Portland, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, you guys are violating your oath you took when you were swearing in for the position. You are derelict of duty. And by that definition, you can and should be removed from office, prosecuted to the fullest extent. And the left, I know, are going to frame this as Trump going after his political enemies. No, you are an enemy of the entire nation. You're an enemy of the citizen that lives on your street. You are an enemy of the illegal immigrant that lives down the road from you. You are an enemy of the United States of America by willfully violating its laws and enabling criminals a safe haven. And the president's asserted his power to protect the republic. He's saying, I will not let your political agenda destroy federal operations. I will not let your personal beef with him result in the injury or death of a federal agent or an American citizen if we can prevent it. This deployment is not about manufactured performance It's a vital necessity to protect the sovereignty of the United States on its own soil. It's about national security. The failure of Portland's judge and Oregon's governor is a clear example of a decentralized resistance the radical left is mounting to undermine federal authority, the Constitution of the United States, and society. They're testing the boundaries, seeing how far they can push before the commander-in-chief is forced to bring the hammer down even more. Which President Trump is right to use all this necessary force to protect the federal interest and personnel. If the governors won't do their job, the government must step in. The National Guard belongs in Chicago and Portland, standing shoulder to shoulder with our federal agents and local law enforcement, pushing back against the rot that the liberal policies has allowed to fester in the heart of our great cities. And with that, I'm going to leave it for you to think and decide. Look at the facts. That's all the time we got for today's show on politics. Join me tomorrow as we discuss the deep state plot to replace all your lawnmowers with electric bicycles. You won't want to miss it. God bless America, and good night.